Across history, every enduring institution eventually reaches a moment when outsiders begin to whisper a dangerous word, crisis. Attendance changes, influence shifts, younger generations ask new questions, and long-standing methods stop producing the same results. When this happens, the easiest conclusion is decline. But history teaches something far more complex. What is commonly labeled as crisis is often transformation trying to happen in unfamiliar clothing. The Adventist Church now finds itself at such a crossroads, and the most important question is not whether it is struggling, but whether it is evolving in response to a changing world. To understand this moment, it helps to recognize how deeply the world itself has changed. Society today is faster, louder, more distracted, and more skeptical than at any previous point in modern history. Information flows constantly, authority is questioned by default, and trust is earned slowly. Institutions built in slower times naturally feel pressure in an age of acceleration. What some interpret as failure may actually be resistance to superficial adaptation. The real tension is between maintaining depth and responding to speed. That tension does not signal collapse. It signals a demand for recalibration. Many observers focus on numbers, visibility, or cultural influence as indicators of health. But numbers fluctuate for many reasons that have little to do with relevance or value. Deeper movements are rarely measured accurately in real time. They work quietly, shaping habits, mindsets, and long-term resilience rather than immediate excitement. The Adventist Church has long emphasized structure, discipline, restraint, and thoughtful living. These traits often feel unpopular during eras obsessed with entertainment and instant gratification. Yet when society becomes exhausted by excess, these same traits regain significance. What looks like crisis during one cycle often becomes credibility in the next. Another reason this moment feels unsettling is because internal questioning has increased. Questioning is often mistaken for disloyalty or breakdown, but in reality, healthy systems invite internal dialogue. Stagnant systems fear questions, evolving systems learn from them. Younger generations are not rejecting meaning itself. They are rejecting shallow answers. They are less impressed by tradition alone and more interested in coherence, authenticity, and lived consistency. This shift is not an attack on identity, it is a test of integrity. Institutions that survive are those willing to clarify what matters most and release what no longer serves that core. Crisis language also emerges when old methods stop working. Methods are not values. Methods are tools, and tools have lifespans. When tools age, the solution is not panic but redesign. The Adventist Church's foundational emphasis on education, health, thoughtful living, and long-term perspective remains surprisingly aligned with modern concerns. Mental health, preventive care, work-life balance, sustainable living, and community resilience are now mainstream conversations. The challenge is not relevance of principles, but translation of language. Transformation requires learning how to speak to a changing world without diluting substance. It is also important to recognize that visibility does not equal impact. Some of the most influential shifts in society happen below the surface, inside homes, schools, clinics, and personal routines. Movements centered on lifestyle and discipline rarely trend on social media, but they shape outcomes over decades. In an era dominated by performance and image, quiet consistency is easily overlooked. Yet when instability grows, people instinctively search for grounded alternatives. What once seemed strict begins to look stable. What once seemed slow begins to look sustainable. Every period of transformation creates discomfort because it forces differentiation between identity and habit. Identity answers the question of purpose. Habits answer the question of expression. Confusing the two leads to paralysis. Protecting every habit in the name of identity prevents adaptation. Abandoning identity in the name of adaptation leads to dilution. The tension the Adventist Church faces is the same tension every long-standing movement faces: how to preserve clarity while improving connection. This tension is not new and it is not fatal, it is developmental. Critics often frame the moment as decline, because decline is easier to explain than transformation. Decline requires no imagination. Transformation requires patience. It unfolds unevenly, often appearing messy in early stages. Structures realign, leadership styles shift, and expectations change. During this process, uncertainty increases before stability returns. This is not failure, it is transition. The discomfort people feel may not be evidence of loss, but of adjustment. Another overlooked factor is that modern society has become less institutionally loyal in general. Participation across all organizations, from civic groups to educational bodies, has declined as individualism increases. This shift affects every institution, not just one. Measuring health without accounting for broader cultural patterns leads to inaccurate conclusions. Adaptation must happen within context, not isolation. One of the greatest opportunities hidden within this moment is authenticity. In a world fatigued by performance, authenticity stands out. People are less interested in perfection and more drawn to coherence between values and behavior. The Adventist emphasis on intentional living, health awareness, moderation, and long-term thinking aligns strongly with this desire. But authenticity cannot be marketed, it must be embodied. Transformation here is less about changing messages and more about clarifying alignment between belief and practice. Transformation also demands humility. Institutions that grow defensive during challenge slow their own progress. Those willing to listen, learn, and refine gain credibility. Humility does not weaken influence, it strengthens trust. Admitting limits, acknowledging past mistakes, and inviting dialogue creates connection in skeptical cultures. Strength today is measured by adaptability, not dominance. This moment also reveals a deeper truth about crisis itself. Crisis is not the presence of difficulty. Crisis is the inability to change when change is required. As long as there is willingness to reassess methods, improve communication, and strengthen lived consistency, transformation remains possible. The Adventist Church still holds intellectual, educational, and lifestyle resources that address real human needs. The question is not whether those resources matter, but whether they are being expressed in ways today's world can receive. Transformation rarely looks impressive in its early stages. It looks quiet, uncertain, sometimes fragmented. But history shows that institutions willing to endure this phase often emerge stronger, leaner, and more focused. Those unwilling to pass through it often preserve appearance for a while, then fade. The choice is rarely between comfort and chaos. It is between stagnation and renewal. In the end, this moment may be less about survival and more about refinement. Every generation reshapes how enduring ideas are lived and communicated. The Adventist Church is not alone in this process, nor is it uniquely threatened by it. What makes this moment powerful is that it forces clarity. It asks hard questions about relevance, depth, and consistency. Institutions that answer those questions honestly do not decline, they evolve. So when people ask whether the Adventist Church is in crisis or transformation, the more accurate answer may be this: it is in the uncomfortable space where transformation begins. Crisis language captures the anxiety of change. Transformation captures its purpose. History suggests that movements grounded in discipline, reflection, and long-term vision do not disappear easily. They adapt quietly, refine patiently, and often re-emerge with greater clarity than before. And when the noise fades, it is clarity, not popularity, that lasts. When long-standing institutions begin to feel uncomfortable, many people immediately label the experience as decline, confusion, or collapse. Yet history repeatedly shows that discomfort often appears not at the end of relevance, but at the edge of renewal. Institutions that have endured for decades or centuries carry deep systems, habits, and values that were designed for stability. When the surrounding world changes rapidly, friction naturally forms. This friction is not accidental. It is the pressure created when something rooted meets an environment that demands adaptation, Discomfort, in this sense, is not a warning sign of death, but an indicator that growth is being negotiated. Rapid cultural change tends to reward speed, visibility, and novelty. Older institutions are rarely built on these traits. They are built on structure, continuity, and long memory. When these foundational strengths encounter a world that values constant reinvention, tension becomes unavoidable. This tension often looks like internal debate, generational disagreement, or questions about identity and direction. To observers, this can feel unsettling, but in reality it signals that the institution is thinking rather than drifting. Stagnant systems rarely feel discomfort because nothing is being challenged. Growth begins the moment questions are allowed to surface. Another reason discomfort emerges before progress is because transformation requires unlearning before relearning. Long-standing systems accumulate practices that once worked well but may now be misaligned with new realities. Letting go of familiar methods is psychologically difficult. It creates resistance, nostalgia, and fear of loss. That emotional friction can feel like crisis, yet it is often the necessary clearing stage before renewal. Institutions that avoid this discomfort usually preserve appearance at the cost of depth, becoming irrelevant quietly rather than painfully. There is also a difference between institutions built on trends and those built on depth. Trend-based movements rise quickly, feel comfortable while conditions favor them, and disappear just as rapidly when circumstances shift. Depth-based institutions move slower and feel strain more intensely because they are trying to integrate change without losing core identity. This creates visible tension, but it also produces durability. The discomfort is evidence that the institution values coherence over convenience and meaning over popularity. In many cases, the people most unsettled by institutional tension are those who equate stability with silence. They expect progress to feel smooth, quiet, and orderly. But meaningful growth is rarely calm. It involves disagreement, recalibration, and moments where the old no longer fits, but the new is not yet fully formed. This in-between stage can feel chaotic, but it is also where creativity emerges. Institutions that allow themselves to sit in this discomfort long enough often emerge stronger, clearer, and more focused. Importantly, discomfort should not be confused with dysfunction. Dysfunction avoids accountability and refuses evaluation. Growth-related tension does the opposite. It asks hard questions, invites reflection, and forces reassessment. Institutions willing to examine themselves honestly may appear unstable for a season, but that instability is purposeful. It is the movement of internal systems reorganizing to meet future demands rather than clinging to past success. The modern world often pressures institutions to resolve tension quickly, to present confidence even when clarity is still forming. However, rushing this process can result in shallow solutions that fix symptoms rather than causes. Long-lasting progress comes from allowing discomfort to complete its work. It is through sustained reflection, disciplined adjustment, and patient dialogue that transformation becomes real rather than cosmetic. Ultimately, discomfort is not the enemy of longevity. Avoidance. Institutions that interpret tension as failure tend to suppress questions, silence innovation, and preserve comfort until relevance fades. Those that interpret tension as information treat it as a signal pointing toward evolution. Growth does not arrive announcing itself with certainty. It arrives wrapped in unease, demanding courage, humility, and vision. Institutions that understand this truth do not fear uncomfortable seasons. They recognize them as the birthplace of their next chapter. Modern society has become deeply conditioned by speed. Information arrives instantly. Opinions form within seconds, and success is often measured by how quickly something gains attention. In such an environment, slow-moving systems appear outdated, inefficient, or irrelevant. Yet history consistently reveals a paradox. Movements that move slowly, deliberately, and thoughtfully often endure long after faster ones collapse. The obsession with immediacy creates visibility, but it does not always create stability. Speed attracts attention while depth builds foundations. Fast movements thrive on momentum. They grow quickly because they are designed to meet immediate emotional or social demands. They simplify complex ideas into short messages, prioritize expansion over coherence, and reward instant results. This approach works well in the short term, especially in cultures driven by novelty. However, what accelerates growth can also weaken structure. When conditions change, fast systems struggle to adapt because they were never designed to slow down, reflect, or recalibrate. Their strength becomes their vulnerability. Slower movements operate under a different logic. They emphasize habits over hype, training over trends, and consistency over visibility. Because their progress is gradual, they are often misunderstood during periods of rapid change. Observers may see decline where there is actually consolidation, or stagnation where there is careful refinement. These movements are not trying to win attention, they are trying to develop people, systems, and values that can function under pressure. This takes time, and time is often mistaken for weakness in a culture addicted to speed. Depth requires repetition, patience, and discipline. Whether in education, health, or community building, meaningful outcomes rarely appear immediately. Skills must be practiced, character must be shaped, and understanding must mature. Slower movements invest in these processes even when recognition is minimal. As a result, they may temporarily lose visibility, especially when competing with louder, faster alternatives. But invisibility is not the same as irrelevance. Often it is a sign of internal work being done away from public attention. Cultural cycles also play a critical role. Periods of rapid growth and constant stimulation inevitably lead to fatigue. People become overwhelmed, trust erodes, and shallow solutions begin to feel empty. When this exhaustion sets in, societies instinctively search for stability, reliability, and meaning. At that moment, movements grounded in depth regain influence. What once seemed too slow suddenly feels safe. What once felt restrictive now feels grounding. The very qualities that were criticized become desired. Another advantage of slower systems is resilience. Because they are built on routines rather than reactions, they are less shaken by sudden change. They do not require constant reinvention to survive. Instead, they are just carefully preserving core principles while updating methods. This balance between continuity and adaptation allows them to outlast cycles of enthusiasm and disappointment that characterize faster movements. The world of speed often rewards performance over substance, but substance quietly accumulates power over time. Depth-based movements may not dominate headlines, but they shape lives steadily. Their influence spreads horizontally rather than explosively through education, daily practice, and long-term relationships. This kind of impact is harder to measure but far more durable. In the end, speed impresses, but depth sustains. Cultures eventually learn that not everything valuable needs to arrive quickly. When noise becomes exhausting and instability becomes normal, societies turn back toward what lasts. Slower movements do not rush to meet every trend because they understand something essential. Relevance is not about arriving first, but about remaining when others fade.
Right, the modern cultures has learned to measure value through numbers, followers, attendance, views, growth charts, and public visibility have become the default language of relevance. When numbers rise, success is assumed. When they fall, decline is declared. This way of measuring influence feels objective, but it is often deeply misleading. Numbers tell us how many noticed something, not how deeply it mattered. Visibility shows what is loud, not what is lasting. As a result, many institutions are judged not by their real impact on human lives, but by their ability to perform in public spaces. True impact almost never looks impressive at first glance. It happens quietly over time and often without applause. It shows up when people make better choices, develop healthier habits, think more critically, and respond more calmly to pressure. These outcomes do not produce viral moments or dramatic spikes on charts. They grow slowly and unevenly, often invisible to anyone focused only on surface-level metrics. Yet these changes are the foundation of long-term resilience in individuals and communities. When institutions chase numbers, they often begin to shape their message and behavior around what attracts the most attention rather than what creates the most growth. Complexity is reduced, depth is sacrificed, and patience is replaced by urgency. This produces quick gains, but weak roots. People may gather in large numbers, but little changes beneath the surface. Over time, this leads to instability, burnout, and disillusionment because performance was prioritized over transformation. By contrast, institutions that prioritize impact focus on outcomes that cannot be instantly measured. They invest in education that reshapes thinking, in health practices that strengthen bodies and minds, and in environments that encourage responsibility rather than dependence. These efforts rarely scale quickly. They require repetition, discipline, and personal engagement. But what they lack in speed, they gain in durability. People shaped in this way remain steady even when external systems fail or trends collapse. Another flaw in number-based measurement is that it assumes growth is always linear and visibility is always positive. In reality, many institutions go through seasons of consolidation, refinement, or internal rebuilding that temporarily reduce outward expansion. These seasons are often necessary for long-term relevance. When surface metrics dip, it may indicate that shallow participation is being replaced by deeper commitment. This looks like loss to those watching charts, but it often signals strengthening beneath the surface. Impact-driven systems also measure success differently across time. Instead of asking how many are present today, they ask who will still be capable, informed, and resilient years from now. This long view changes priorities. It values consistency over excitement, understanding over persuasion, and stability over rapid expansion. These priorities may not attract constant attention, but they prepare individuals and communities to endure uncertainty. Modern society is beginning to feel the limits of performance-based influence. High visibility has not prevented rising anxiety, fragmentation, or burnout. As these pressures increase, people start searching for systems that actually work, not just systems that look successful. In this shift, institutions rooted in substance regain relevance, even if they never dominate headlines again. Their value becomes evident through outcomes rather than impression. Ultimately, relevance is not proven by how many people look towards something, but by how many are strengthened because of it. Numbers rise and fall with trends, algorithms, and moods. Impact accumulates quietly, shaping decisions, habits, and resilience over time. Institutions that understand this do not panic when surface metrics fluctuate. They remain focused on substance, knowing that when society eventually asks what truly lasts, depth will matter more than display.